In ancient Rome, Marcus Aurelius Maximus, once a respected nobleman, now fights as a gladiator after losing everything in a political conspiracy. Scarred and broken, he endures mockery at the marketplace until he encounters Livia Claudia, daughter of the powerful Senator Gaius Claudius, the very man who orchestrated his downfall. When Marcus boldly claims she will come with him, it sets in motion a tale of forbidden love, redemption, and sacrifice that will challenge the foundations of Roman society and test whether love can truly conquer all. The morning sun cast long shadows across the bustling Roman marketplace as vendors hawked their wares and citizens went about their daily business. The air was thick with the scent of fresh bread, exotic spices, and the less pleasant odors of unwashed bodies and animal waste that characterized any crowded urban center. Marcus Aurelius Maximus moved through the crowd like a ghost of his former self. Once, these same people would have bowed their heads in respect when he passed. Once, his family name had commanded fear and admiration throughout the Roman Republic. Now the purple stripe that had once adorned his toga was replaced by the rough leather and bronze of a gladiator's training garb. At 30 years old, Marcus bore the weight of his fall from grace in every line of his weathered face. His dark hair, now longer and unkempt, fell across intelligent brown eyes that had seen too much blood and betrayal. Scars crisscrossed his muscled arms and chest, some from the arena, others from the torture he'd endured in the dungeons before his exile from nobility. "Look there," sneered a merchant, loud enough for half the market to hear. "It's the great Marcus Maximus. Tell us, mighty gladiator, how does it feel to go from silk sheets to sleeping with the rats?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. Marcus kept walking, his jaw clenched tight. He had learned that responding only brought more humiliation. "I heard he once commanded 3 legions," called out another voice. "Now he can barely command respect from a wooden practice sword." More laughter. A rotten apple flew through the air, striking Marcus on the shoulder. He didn't flinch, didn't turn around. His hand instinctively moved to where his gladius would hang. But he carried no weapon here. Gladiators were forbidden arms outside the ludus. "My father says he was stripped of his rank for cowardice," a young patrician boy said loudly to his friends. "That he ran from battle like a woman." This time Marcus stopped. His hands clenched into fists, and for a moment the crowd quieted, sensing danger. The boy who had spoken was perhaps 16, well-dressed, with the soft look of someone who had never known true hardship. He reminded Marcus painfully of himself at that age, arrogant, privileged, ignorant of how quickly fortune could turn. "Careful, boy," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying despite its low tone. "Fortune's wheel turns for all of us. You may find yourself in chains before you know it." The boy laughed nervously, but his friends had gone quiet. There was something in Marcus's eyes that spoke of violence barely held in check. "Are you threatening me, slave?" the boy demanded, though his voice cracked slightly. Before Marcus could respond, the crowd suddenly shifted, people pressing back to make way for an approaching litter. 8 slaves carried the ornate sedan chair, their synchronized steps speaking of long practice. Behind them rode a contingent of Praetorian guards, their red plumes and polished armor gleaming in the sunlight. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice as he recognized the occupant of the litter. Senator Gaius Claudius, the Nean who had orchestrated his downfall, who had fabricated evidence of treason and bribery to destroy the Maximus family. The man who had taken everything from him. Claudius was in his 50s, with the soft body of someone who had never done physical labor. His toga was of the finest white wool with a broad purple stripe indicating his senatorial rank. Gold rings adorned his fingers, and a laurel wreath sat upon his graying hair. But it was his eyes that Marcus remembered most. Cold, calculating, without mercy or honor. As the litter passed, Claudius's gaze fell upon Marcus. For a moment, their eyes met, and a small, satisfied smile played at the senator's lips. He had won, and they both knew it. Marcus had been thoroughly destroyed, reduced from a powerful nobleman to an entertainment for the masses. But then Marcus noticed her. Walking beside the litter, flanked by her own guards and attendants, was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. She was perhaps 25, with lustrous dark hair arranged in the elaborate style of a patrician lady. Her stola was of deep blue silk that complemented her olive skin, and jewelry of gold and precious stones adorned her neck and wrists. But it was her eyes that captured him, large, dark, and filled with an intelligence that seemed to take in everything around her. Unlike her father, there was no cruelty in her gaze, only a kind of weary sadness that spoke of a spirit trapped by circumstance. Livia Claudia, daughter of his enemy. Marcus had heard of her, of course, the Senate's most eligible bachelorette, pursued by every ambitious young patrician in Rome. She was said to be not only beautiful but learned, fluent in Greek, well-versed in philosophy and poetry, a prize worthy of the highest bidder. As she passed, her eyes found his, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. There was no recognition there. She couldn't possibly know who he was, but something passed between them, a spark, a connection that defied explanation. Then the moment was broken by renewed jeering from the crowd. "Even look at your betters too long, Gladiator," someone shouted. "Know your place." "He's probably never seen a real lady before," laughed another voice. "Only the whores who service the fighters." The insults rained down, but Marcus barely heard them. His eyes remained fixed on Livia as she continued past, her bearing regal despite the chaos around her. She glanced back once, their eyes meeting again briefly before she looked away. Something had awakened in Marcus's chest, something he thought had died in the dungeons 3 years ago. Hope, desire, the first stirring of an emotion beyond mere survival. The patrician boy from earlier, emboldened by the crowd's renewed mockery, stepped closer to Marcus. "Did you see how she looked at you, Gladiator? Like you were something unpleasant on her sandal. Even a senator's daughter knows refuse when she sees it." The crowd roared with laughter at this, but Marcus felt a strange calm descend over him. Slowly he turned to face the boy, then looked out over the entire crowd of merchants, citizens, and slaves who had gathered to witness his humiliation. When he spoke, his voice carried with the authority he had once wielded as a commander of legions. The crowd fell silent, despite themselves. "You mock me now," Marcus said, his gaze sweeping over them all before settling on the retreating figure of Livia Claudia. "You see only a fallen gladiator, entertainment for your amusement. But I tell you this," he raised his arm and pointed directly at Livia, who had stopped and turned at the sound of his voice carrying across the marketplace. "She's coming with me." The words hung in the air like a challenge to the gods themselves. The crowd erupted in disbelieving laughter, but there was an edge of uncertainty now. Something in Marcus's tone, his bearing, suggested this was not the ravings of a broken man, but a declaration of intent. Livia stood frozen, her dark eyes wide with shock and something else, curiosity, fear. Her guards had their hands on their sword hilts, waiting for her command or her father's. Senator Claudius had climbed from his litter, his face purple with rage. "Seize that man," he commanded. "How dare he speak of my daughter? How dare he even look upon her?" But Marcus was already moving, melting back into the crowd with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to survive by his wits. The Praetorian guards pushed forward, but the marketplace was a maze of stalls and bodies, and Marcus knew every alley and hidden path from his months of scraping out a living here. As he disappeared into the shadowy spaces between buildings, he could hear Claudius shouting orders, the crowd buzzing with excitement and speculation. But above it all, he carried with him the memory of Livia's eyes in that moment of connection, and the impossible words he had spoken. "She's coming with me." Even he didn't fully understand why he had said it, what madness had possessed him to make such a declaration. But as he made his way through the winding streets back toward the Ludus, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years. He felt alive. The marble walls of Senator Gaius Claudius's villa, echoed with his thunderous voice as he paced back and forth across the atrium like a caged lion. Servants cowered in corners, having learned through painful experience to make themselves invisible when their master was in one of his rages. "Find him!" Claudius roared at the captain of his personal guard. "Search every brothel, every tavern, every rat-infested corner of the Suburra if you must. I want that gladiator's tongue cut out for his insolence." Captain Brutus Casca, a grizzled veteran with scars mapping his weathered face, stood at attention but dared to speak. "Senator, the gladiator schools are under imperial protection. We cannot simply— I don't care about protection." Claudius's fist crashed down on a nearby table, sending a precious Greek vase tumbling to the floor, where it shattered into 1,000 pieces. That animal dared to speak my daughter's name in public. He pointed at her like she was some common whore in the marketplace. Livia Claudia sat quietly on a marble bench beneath a painted fresco depicting the triumph of Caesar, her hands folded in her lap. She had said nothing since returning from the market, but her mind raced with the memory of the gladiator's eyes and his impossible declaration. There had been something in his gaze, a depth of intelligence and pain that spoke of a man who had once been much more than what he appeared. The way he had carried himself, even while being mocked, suggested nobility born rather than earned. And his voice, when he had made his declaration, it had carried the authority of someone accustomed to command. "Livia," her father's sharp voice cut through her reverie. "Are you even listening to me?" "Yes, father," she replied quietly, though she hadn't heard a word he'd said. Claudius studied his daughter's face with the calculating gaze that had made him one of Rome's most feared politicians. "You seem distracted. That slave didn't frighten you, did he? Speak honestly, did he threaten you in any way?" Livia lifted her dark eyes to meet her father. "He didn't threaten me, father. He barely looked at me. It was a lie, and she wasn't sure why she told it. The gladiator had looked at her, really looked at her, in a way that no man had dared in years. Most suitors saw only her father's wealth and political connections when they gazed upon her. This stranger had seemed to see something else entirely. "Good," Claudius said, though suspicion still lingered in his expression, "because I won't have my daughter's reputation tainted by association with arena filth. Your betrothal to Marcus Crassus Aquilus is too important to be jeopardized by scandal." At the mention of her impending marriage, Livia's stomach tightened. Marcus Crassus Aquilus was 40 years old, possessed of a massive fortune but all the charm and intelligence of a particularly slow ox. He had buried 2 wives already and was seeking a third to bear him the sons his previous marriages had failed to produce. "Father," Livia began carefully, "perhaps we could delay the betrothal announcement." "I'm still young, and you're 25, Claudius interrupted sharply. "In most families you would have been married off years ago. I've been patient, allowing you to pursue your studies and poetry, but patience has its limits. Aquilus brings us vast wealth and valuable political alliances. The matter is settled." Livia bit back the words she wanted to say. She had no more choice in this marriage than a horse had in choosing its rider. Roman daughters were currency to be spent wisely, and she was simply the most valuable coin in her father's purse. "Now," Claudius continued, his tone softening slightly, "I want you to remain within the villa grounds for the next few days. No trips to the market, no visits to your friends. I'm doubling your guard detail." "Father, surely that's not necessary." "It is necessary," he said firmly. That gladiator's words today were not the ravings of a madman. There was intent behind them, purpose. "I've made many enemies over the years, Livia. It's possible someone is using him to target our family. If only you knew," Livia thought, "how many enemies you've made." Her father's rise to power had been built on a foundation of other men's ruins. She had no idea of the specific details. Claudius kept his darker dealings from her, but she wasn't naive. No one accumulated that much wealth and influence through honest means alone. A slave entered the atrium, bowing low. "Master, there is a visitor. Dominus Sextus Aurelius Corvus requests an audience." Claudius's eyes lit up with interest. Corvus was one of the wealthiest grain merchants in Rome, and more importantly, he had extensive connections throughout the gladiator schools. If anyone could provide information about the mysterious fighter, it would be him. "Send him in," Claudius ordered. "Livia, retire to your chambers. This doesn't concern you." As Livia rose to leave, she caught sight of their visitor entering the atrium. Sextus Aurelius Corvus was a thin, sharp-featured man with calculating eyes and expensive clothes that couldn't quite mask his common origins. He moved with the quick, nervous energy of someone always looking for an angle, always seeking profit. "My dear Claudius," Corvus said with an oily smile as he approached, "I heard about the unfortunate incident at the market today. How terrible that such ruffians are allowed to walk freely among decent citizens." Livia paused at the doorway, curiosity overcoming obedience. Something in Corvus's tone suggested he knew more than he was letting on. "Indeed," Claudius replied coldly, "which is why I'm going to ensure it never happens again." "Tell me, Corvus, what do you know about gladiators? Specifically one who seems to have ideas above his station." Corvus stroked his chin thoughtfully. "Well, as you know, I have business relationships with several of the gladiator schools. I provide them with grain, they provide me with information about upcoming matches for betting purposes. A mutually beneficial arrangement." "Get to the point," Claudius said impatiently. "The point, my friend, is that gladiators are not all cut from the same cloth. Most are slaves, criminals or barbarians with nothing to lose. But occasionally," he paused dramatically, "occasionally a man falls from great height and finds himself in the arena. Such men are dangerous because they remember what they once were." Livia felt her breath catch. There was something in Corvus's words that seemed to be leading somewhere specific. Claudius leaned forward. "Are you suggesting you know something about this particular gladiator?" "I might," Corvus said carefully, "but information of this quality comes at a price. I have expenses. You understand? Informants to pay, favors to call in." "Name your price," Claudius said without hesitation. Corvus smiled. 20,000 sesterces, and a small favor. I have a nephew who seeks a position in the grain distribution office. A word from you to the right people would be most appreciated." "Done," Claudius agreed immediately. "Now speak." Livia pressed herself against the doorframe, straining to hear every word. "The gladiator's name in the arena is simply Maximus," Corvus began. "He fights for the Lotus of Gaius Tribius Maxima, one of the smaller schools. He's been there for nearly 3 years, and he's gained something of a reputation." "What kind of reputation?" "He's undefeated in single combat. 43 victories, no defeats. They say he fights with a tactical brilliance that suggests military training. Real military training, not the crude brawling most gladiators employ." Claudius frowned. "You think he's a deserter? A former legionnaire?" "Possibly." Or Corvus paused again, clearly savoring the moment. "He could be someone who once held a much higher position, someone whose fall from grace was so complete that the arena became his only option for survival." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Livia saw her father's face go pale, then flush with a dangerous color. "What are you implying?" Claudius asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not implying anything, my dear Claudius. I'm simply sharing what I've learned through careful investigation. This gladiator, this Maximus, some say his real name is Marcus Aurelius Maximus, former commander of the 3rd and 7th legions, former head of one of Rome's most ancient patrician families." The silence that followed was deafening. Livia felt her heart hammering against her ribs as the implications crashed over her like a wave. Marcus Aurelius Maximus. She knew that name. Everyone in Rome knew that name, though it hadn't been spoken aloud in polite company for 3 years. The Maximus family had once been rivals to her father's political ambitions. They had stood in the way of several lucrative contracts and political appointments. And then, suddenly, Marcus Maximus had been accused of treason and embezzlement. The evidence had been overwhelming, his guilt seemingly undeniable. His family's wealth had been confiscated, their names stripped from the rolls of nobility, their very existence erased from Roman society. Marcus himself had simply vanished. Most assumed he had fled Rome in disgrace, or taken his own life rather than face the consequences of his crimes. "That's impossible," Claudius said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Marcus Maximus is dead. Has to be." "Is he?" Corvus asked, with a knowing smile. "Then who was the man who dared to claim your daughter would come with him? What slave or common criminal would have the audacity to make such a declaration in public? What ordinary gladiator would carry himself with such bearing, speak with such authority?" Claudius sank into his chair, his mind clearly racing. If Marcus Maximus was alive, if he had somehow survived and returned to Rome, it changed everything. A dead enemy could cause no trouble, but a living one, especially one with nothing left to lose, was extremely dangerous. "Even if it is him," Claudius said slowly, "he's nothing now. A gladiator, a slave in all but name. He has no power, no allies, no resources. What threat could he possibly pose?" "You forget, my friend, that Marcus Maximus was once beloved by his soldiers. The common people respected him, saw him as an honest alternative to the usual corruption of Roman politics. If word were to spread that he was alive, that he had been falsely accused, Corvus let the implication hang in the air. The evidence against him was solid," Claudius protested, though there was sweat beading on his forehead now. "Was it?" Corvus asked quietly. "Because if it wasn't, if certain irregularities were to come to light, it might raise uncomfortable questions about how that evidence was obtained, about who benefited from his downfall." Livia felt sick. Her father's guilt was written across his face, as clearly as words on parchment. Marcus Maximus had been innocent, framed, destroyed by false evidence and perjured testimony, and her father had been the architect of it all. "What do you want?" Claudius asked, his voice hollow. "Nothing more than what we agreed," Corvus said smoothly. "Payment for information. What you do with that information is entirely your decision. Though if I might offer some friendly advice, Marcus Maximus was once your rival for power and influence. Now he's a gladiator with nothing to lose and everything to avenge. If I were in your position, I might consider that the best way to handle a dangerous animal is to ensure it never leaves its cage." The meaning was unmistakable. Corvus was suggesting murder. Claudius nodded slowly. "The arena is a dangerous place. Accidents happen all the time." "Indeed they do," Corvus agreed. "A word to the right lanista, a few coins in the right purse, and even the most skilled gladiator can find himself facing impossible odds. The crowd loves a good death, after all. They rarely ask questions about how it came to pass." From her hiding place, Livia watched her father transform, before her eyes, from a worried politician into something cold and calculating, a man capable of ordering murder without hesitation. She had always known he was ruthless, but seeing it displayed so openly made her stomach churn. "Make the arrangements," Claudius said finally, "but be discreet, and make it look convincing. I won't have this traced back to me." Corvus bowed. "It shall be as you wish. The gladiator will be dead within a week." As the two men continued to discuss the details of Marcus's murder, Livia slipped away from the doorway and made her way to her chambers on unsteady legs. Her mind reeled with everything she had learned. Marcus Aurelius Maximus was alive. He was innocent of the crimes that had destroyed him. Her father was not only responsible for framing him, but was now planning to have him killed. And somehow, impossibly, this fallen nobleman had looked at her in the marketplace and declared she would come with him. As she reached her room and closed the door behind her, Livia found herself facing an impossible choice. She could remain silent, allow her father's plan to proceed, and watch an innocent man die. Or she could act, somehow warn Marcus of the danger he faced. But how could she help him without destroying herself? And why did the thought of his death fill her with such desperate anguish? She moved to her window, which overlooked the villa's gardens, and stared out at the setting sun. Somewhere in Rome, Marcus Maximus was preparing for what might be his final night of life, unaware that death was already being arranged for him. "She's coming with me," she whispered, repeating his words from the marketplace. For the first time in her life, Livia Claudia began to wonder if perhaps she should. The ludus of Gaius Tribius Maximus squatted in the shadow of the Palatine Hill like a forgotten wound in Rome's flesh. Unlike the grand gladiatorial schools that trained fighters for the Colosseum's most prestigious games, this was a place where broken men came to die slowly. One fight at a time, Marcus sat on the edge of his narrow cot in the cramped cell he shared with 3 other gladiators, methodically sharpening his practice sword with a whetstone worn smooth by countless hands. The rhythmic scraping sound had become a meditation for him over the past 3 years, a way to quiet the voices of memory that whispered of everything he had lost. "You're brooding again," observed Gaius Brutus, a former legionnaire from Gaul, whose scarred face bore testament to a dozen campaigns. At 45, he was ancient by gladiator standards, but his experience and cunning had kept him alive when younger, stronger men had fallen. Marcus didn't look up from his blade. "I'm thinking, dangerous habit in a place like this," rumbled Titus Maximus. No relation to Marcus despite the shared name. The massive German had been captured in one of Caesar's campaigns and had spent 8 years in the arena. His body was a map of old wounds, but his spirit remained unbroken. "Thinking makes a man slow. Slow gets you dead." "Not all thinking," said the 4th occupant of their cell. Flavius was barely 22, a former thief from the Suburra who had chosen the arena over crucifixion. Despite his youth, he possessed a quick wit and quicker hands that had made him invaluable for gathering information within the ludus. "Some thoughts are worth the risk." Marcus finally raised his eyes to meet those of his cellmates. These 3 men had become closer to him than brothers over the years of shared hardship. They knew nothing of his true identity. He had been careful to reveal only that he was a former soldier, but they had earned his trust through blood and sweat. "What did you hear in the city today?" Marcus asked Flavius, who had been granted permission to run errands for the Lister. Flavius grinned, revealing teeth that were surprisingly white for someone of his background. "Quite a tale, actually. Seems a certain gladiator made quite an impression at the market. The whole city's buzzing about it." Brutus groaned. "Please tell me you didn't actually say what they're claiming you said." "What are they claiming?" Marcus asked carefully. "That you pointed at Senator Claudius's daughter and announced she was coming with you," Titus said bluntly. "Please tell me it's just market gossip grown out of proportion." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, then returned to sharpening his sword. "It's not gossip." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sounds of other gladiators training in the courtyard. The clash of wooden swords, the shouts of instructors, the occasional cry of pain from someone who had moved too slowly. "Mother of Mars," Brutus whispered, "have you lost your mind completely? Do you know who Gaius Claudius is? What he could do to you, to all of us, if he decides we're associated with your madness?" "I know exactly who he is," Marcus replied, his voice carrying a weight that made his cellmates exchange worried glances. Flavius leaned forward, his curiosity overcoming his caution. "There's more to this story, isn't there? You're not just some lovesick fool dreaming of a senator's daughter." Marcus set down his sword and whetstone, then looked at each of his companions in turn. These men had stood with him in the arena, had watched his back in the dark corners of the ludus where weak gladiators were murdered for their meager possessions. If anyone deserved the truth, it was them. "My real name," he said quietly, "is Marcus Aurelius Maximus." The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Brutus went pale as parchment, Titus's massive hands clenched into fists. Flavius's mouth fell open in shock. "The Marcus Maximus," Brutus whispered, "the one who commanded the 3rd and 7th legions, who was accused of crimes I didn't commit," Marcus finished. "Claudius destroyed my family with fabricated evidence and perjured witnesses. He took everything from me, my name, my fortune, my honor. And now he plans to take my life. How could you know that? Flavius asked. Before Marcus could answer, the cell door clanged open. Gaius Tribius, Maxima, the lanista who owned their ludus, stood in the doorway. He was a thin, nervous man, with darting eyes and fingers stained with ink from his constant record-keeping. Behind him loomed two of his guards, both former gladiators who had earned their freedom and now served as enforcers. Maximus, the lanista said, his voice higher than usual with anxiety. "You're to come with me now." Marcus rose slowly, his hand instinctively moving toward where his sword lay. "What's this about, Trebius?" "Questions," the lanista replied evasively. "Someone wants to speak with you about your behavior today." Marcus's cellmates tensed, ready to fight despite the hopelessness of their situation. But Marcus shook his head slightly, warning them off. Violence here would only get them all killed, and he had already brought enough suffering to those around him. "Lead on," Marcus said simply. They walked through the cramped corridors of the ludus, past cells filled with men from every corner of the empire, Germans, Gauls, Numidians, Thracians, all united by their shared fate. Some called out encouragement as Marcus passed. His reputation as an undefeated fighter had earned him respect throughout the school. The lanista's office was a cluttered mess of scrolls, betting records and weapons in various states of repair. But Marcus's attention was immediately drawn to the man sitting behind Trebius's desk, a thin, sharp-featured individual with calculating eyes who radiated the kind of nervous energy that came from constantly seeking profit. The famous Maximus," the man said with an oily smile. "Please, sit. I am Sextus Aurelius Corvus, and I have a proposition that might interest you." Marcus remained standing. "I know who you are, Corvus. Your reputation precedes you." "Does it indeed?" Corvus seemed pleased. "Then you know I'm a man who appreciates value when I see it, and you, my friend, represent considerable value." "Get to the point." Corvus's smile widened. "Direct. I like that. Very well. I'm here to offer you an opportunity. A special match, arranged for a very select audience. The purse would be substantial." "How substantial?" Trebius interjected, his eyes lighting up with greed. 50,000 sestertii to the winner." Corvus replied smoothly, "half of which would go to the ludus, of course, as per standard arrangements." It was an enormous sum, enough to buy freedom for several gladiators, but Marcus had learned to be suspicious of offers that seemed too good to be true. "What's the catch?" he asked. "No catch," Corvus protested innocently. "Simply a match against Rome's finest gladiator. The crowd loves to see champions face each other, and you've built quite a reputation. 43 victories, no defeats, most impressive. Who would I be fighting?" Corvus paused, as if considering his words carefully. "Lucius Domitius Crustus. They call him the Titan of Carthage. He's never lost a match in 5 years of fighting." Marcus knew the name. Crustus was a massive Numidian who stood nearly 7 feet tall and possessed strength that bordered on the supernatural. He was also known for his brutality. Most of his opponents didn't survive to see the end of their matches. "When?" Marcus asked. 3 days hence. A private exhibition for some of Rome's most influential citizens. Very prestigious. And if I refuse?" Corvus's smile faltered slightly. "Why would you refuse such a generous offer? Unless, of course, you doubt your own abilities." The challenge was obvious, and Marcus recognized it for what it was. Bait. But he also sensed something else in Corvus's manner. A tension that suggested this wasn't simply about profit or entertainment. "I'll consider it," Marcus said finally. "Excellent." Corvus clapped his hands together. "Trebius here can work out the details. I'm sure this will be a match for the ages." As Corvus prepared to leave, he paused at the door and looked back at Marcus. "Oh, and Maximus, I'd recommend getting plenty of rest over the next few days. You'll need all your strength for what's coming." There was something in his tone that sent a chill down Marcus's spine. This wasn't just a match, it was an execution disguised as entertainment. After Corvus left, Trebius could barely contain his excitement. 50,000 sestertii. Do you know what this could mean for the loot? We could expand, buy better equipment, attract higher-class gladiators. Tribius, Marcus interrupted. How long have I been fighting for you? 3 years. Why? In 3 years, have I ever given you reason to doubt my judgment? The Lanista frowned. No, of course not. You've been exemplary, my most valuable fighter. Then trust me when I tell you this match is not what it seems. Corvus isn't here to make us wealthy. He's here to ensure I die in the arena. That's ridiculous, Tribius protested, but uncertainty crept into his voice. Why would anyone want you dead? You're just a gladiator. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options. Then he made a decision that would change everything. Because I'm not just a gladiator, he said. And it's time you knew the truth about who you've been harboring in your loot. As Marcus began to tell his story, the real story of his fall from grace and the conspiracy that had destroyed his family, neither he nor Tribius noticed the small figure that had been listening outside the office door. Flavius had followed them, his thief's instincts warning him that something was amiss. Now he crept away from his hiding place, his mind racing with the implications of what he had heard. Marcus Maximus was walking into a trap, and Flavius was perhaps the only one who could help him. But doing so would require taking a risk that could cost him his own life. As he made his way back through the Lodus, Flavius began formulating a plan. It was dangerous, probably foolish, and almost certainly doomed to failure. But sometimes, he reflected, friendship demanded impossible things. Meanwhile, in a villa across the city, another person was struggling with an impossible choice. Livia Claudia stood at her window, staring out into the night and wrestling with the knowledge that an innocent man would die unless she acted. She had spent hours pacing her chambers, trying to convince herself that Marcus Maximus's fate was not her responsibility. He was nothing to her, a stranger glimpsed briefly in a marketplace, a man whose very existence threatened her family's carefully constructed lives. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face. Not the scarred, weathered features of the gladiator, but something deeper, a nobility that couldn't be stripped away by circumstance, an integrity that had survived 3 years of degradation and hardship. And his words echoed in her mind, "She's coming with me." What had he meant? What had he seen in that brief moment when their eyes met that had inspired such a declaration? A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come," she called quietly. Her personal slave, Claudia, a Greek girl only a few years younger than herself, entered carrying a tray of food. "You didn't come to dinner, Domina. Your father was concerned." Livia waved dismissively at the food. "I'm not hungry." "Tell me, Claudia, what do you know about the gladiator schools?" The slave looked surprised by the question. "Very little, Domina. Why do you ask?" "Curiosity. Are there ways to send messages to gladiators? Warnings, perhaps?" Claudia's eyes widened with understanding. "You're thinking of the man from the market, the one who spoke Kokyu." Livia nodded. There was no point in denying it. Claudia had been with her since childhood, and knew her better than anyone. "There are ways," Claudia said carefully. "Some of the slaves in the kitchens have connections to the gladiator schools. They sometimes carry messages for betting purposes." Or, she trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. "Or what? Some of the gladiators have women who visit them, wives, lovers, friends. The guards can be bribed to look the other way, especially in the smaller schools where discipline is lax." Livia felt her heart racing. Could such an arrangement be made quickly? "Tonight, perhaps?" "Domina," Claudia said urgently. "What you're considering is extremely dangerous. If your father discovered that you had contact with any gladiator, especially this one, he would disown me," Livia finished. "Or worse." "Then why risk it?" Livia was quiet for a long moment, then turned from the window to face her slave and friend. "Because sometimes, Claudia, doing what's right matters more than doing what's safe. This man is innocent of the crimes that destroyed him. My father framed him, and now he plans to have him murdered. I can't stand by and watch that happen." Claudia studied her mistress's face and saw a determination she had never witnessed before. "What message would you send?" "A warning. And that? Livia hesitated, then pressed on. And perhaps something more. Tell me, is it possible to arrange a meeting? Somewhere private, away from prying eyes. Domina, no, you cannot seriously be considering. I am, Livia said firmly. This gladiator looked at me and saw something worth claiming, worth risking everything for. I need to understand what that was. And perhaps he deserves the chance to hear the truth from someone who knows it. Claudia shook her head in dismay, but she had served the Claudius family long enough to recognize when argument was futile. There is a place, she said reluctant, an old temple to Venus, abandoned since the new one was built. It lies between the city and the gladiator schools. If a meeting were to be arranged, arrange it, Livia said without hesitation. Tomorrow. As Claudia left to set the impossible plan in motion, Livia returned to her window and gazed out at the stars. Somewhere in the darkness, a man who had lost everything was preparing to face death in the arena. But if fortune favored them both, perhaps they would first have a chance to discover what fate had set in motion between them in a crowded marketplace when their eyes met and the world changed forever. The die was cast. Tomorrow would bring answers, or it would bring destruction. Either way, Livia Claudia was finally ready to take control of her own destiny. The abandoned Temple of Venus stood like a forgotten dream beneath the pale moonlight, its crumbling columns and weed-choked courtyard bearing witness to the fickle nature of Roman devotion. Once, this shrine had been a place of beauty and worship, where lovers came to seek the goddess's blessing. Now it served as shelter for beggars and a meeting place for those who conducted business best left hidden from the light of day. Marcus approached the ruins with the cautious steps of a man who had learned that every shadow might conceal an enemy. The message had come to him through Flavius, delivered by a chain of whispered conversations and carefully passed coin. A woman wished to meet him, a woman who claimed to know the truth about his past and the danger he now faced. He had almost dismissed it as a trap. In 3 years as a gladiator, he had received many such invitations, most of them leading to ambushes by men seeking to claim the bounty that various enemies had placed on his head. But something about this message had been different. The messenger had known details about his situation that suggested access to the highest levels of Roman society. As he stepped through the temple's broken doorway, Marcus's hand instinctively moved to the gladius at his side. He was forbidden to carry weapons outside the ludus, but Flavius's connections in the criminal underworld had provided him with a blade for this night's work. The interior of the temple was a study in decay. Marble statues of Venus in her various aspects, lover, mother, goddess of victory, stood headless or armless, their beauty marred by time and neglect. Weeds grew through cracks in the floor, and the air carried the musty scent of abandon. But there, in the moonlight streaming through a gap in the roof, stood a figure that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. Livia Claudia waited beside the altar of Venus, her dark cloak unable to conceal the regal bearing that marked her as nobility. In the pale light, she seemed almost ethereal, like one of the goddess's own avatars come to earth. Her dark hair was simply arranged, and she wore a plain stola that spoke of her desire to avoid attention, but nothing could diminish her natural beauty. "You came," she said softly, her voice carrying a mixture of relief and apprehension. "I gave my word," Marcus replied, though he remained near the doorway, ready to flee if this proved to be a trap. "Though I confess I'm curious why the daughter of Gaius Claudius would risk her reputation to meet with a gladiator in a ruined temple." Livia stepped closer, and in the moonlight Marcus could see the determination in her dark eyes, because that gladiator is Marcus Aurelius Maximus, and he deserves to know the truth about what happened to him. The sound of his real name spoken aloud after 3 years of anonymity hit Marcus like a physical blow. "You know who I am." "I know more than that," Livia said, her voice growing stronger. "I know you were innocent. I know my father destroyed your family with fabricated evidence, and I know he's planning to have you killed in the arena within the next few days." Marcus stepped fully into the temple, his weariness overcome by the need to understand. "How could you possibly know these things?" "Because I overheard him planning it with Sextus Corvus," Livia replied. They spoke of arranging a special match, ensuring you face impossible odds. They mean to make it look like an accident, but it will be murder. The confirmation of his suspicions should have filled Marcus with rage, but instead he felt only a weary acceptance. He had known this day would come eventually. Claudius could never allow him to live, not when his very existence was a threat to the senator's carefully constructed lies. "Why warn me?" Marcus asked. "What does the innocent daughter of my enemy gain by helping me?" Livia was quiet for a moment, then moved to stand beside one of the broken statues of Venus. In the moonlight, with her face touched by shadow and silver, she looked like a goddess herself, beautiful and terrible and utterly compelling. "Because," she said finally, "I've spent my entire life watching my father destroy good men for his own gain. I've seen him lie, cheat, and murder his way to power while I remained silent, complicit in my silence. But when I saw you in the marketplace, when you looked at me and made that impossible declaration," she turned to face him fully, and Marcus saw tears glittering in her eyes. "You saw something in me that no one else ever has. Not a political alliance, not a path to wealth and power, not a prize to be won. You saw me, just me, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I might be worth something more than the price my father could get for me in marriage." Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a wall he had built around his heart, beginning to crack. "You don't know what you're saying. I'm nothing now. A slave in all but name, with no future beyond the next fight. Even if I survive whatever trap Corvus has set, I'll never be free of the arena." "Then let's change that," Livia said, stepping closer. "I have money, jewels, enough to buy your freedom and more. We could leave Rome, start over somewhere far from my father's reach." "And what then?" Marcus asked, though his voice had grown soft. "You would give up everything, your family, your position, your future for a man you barely know." "I know enough," Livia replied. "I know you were once a man of honor, who commanded the respect of soldiers and citizens alike. Shisha, I know you've survived 3 years of degradation without losing that honor. And I know that when you looked at me in the marketplace, you saw something worth claiming, worth fighting for." She reached out tentatively and placed her hand on his scarred forearm. "I also know that I've never felt about anyone the way I felt in that moment when our eyes met. It was like Venus herself had struck me with one of Cupid's arrows." Marcus looked down at her small hand on his battle-scarred arm, and for a moment he allowed himself to imagine what she was offering. A life of freedom, of love, of redemption. A chance to become more than just a weapon for the crowd's entertainment. But the dream faded, as quickly as it had formed. "Your father would never allow it. He would hunt us to the ends of the earth, before he'd let his daughter run away with the man he destroyed. Then we make sure he can't follow," Livia said, her voice taking on a determined edge. "My father's power is built on secrets and lies. If those secrets were to become public knowledge..." Marcus stared at her in surprise. "You're talking about destroying your own father." "I'm talking about seeing justice done," Livia corrected. "My father has committed crimes that would see him exiled or executed if they came to light. The fabricated evidence against you is just the beginning. There are murdered rivals, stolen property, bribes paid to judges and senators. I've heard enough conversations, seen enough documents to bring his entire empire crashing down. But he's your father," Marcus protested. "Your family, your blood." Livia's laugh was bitter. "Blood? My father sees me as property to be sold to the highest bidder. He's already arranged my marriage to Marcus Crassus Aquilus, a man who's buried 2 wives and wants a third to breed him sons. Do you know what my future holds, Marcus? To be chained to a man I despise, to bear children for someone who sees me as nothing more than a broodmare, to watch my father continue his crimes while I remain silent and complicit." She moved closer, close enough that Marcus could smell the subtle perfume she wore, could see the way the moonlight caught in her dark hair. "You offered me something different," she continued. When you looked at me and said I was coming with you, you offered me a choice, a chance to be more than just a senator's daughter waiting to be sold in marriage. I want that choice, Marcus. I want the life you saw in your eyes when you looked at me. Marcus felt the last of his resistance crumbling. This woman, this beautiful, intelligent, courageous woman, was offering him everything he had lost and more. Love, companionship, a chance at redemption, a future beyond the blood and sand of the arena. But accepting would mean putting her in terrible danger. "Livia," he said softly, reaching up to cup her face in his scarred hands. "You don't understand what you're asking. Your father will never stop hunting us. He has the resources of the Roman state at his disposal, connections throughout the empire. We would be fugitives for the rest of our lives." "Then so be it," she replied, turning her face to press a kiss to his palm. "I would rather live 1 year free with you than a lifetime in a golden cage without you." The touch of her lips against his skin sent fire racing through Marcus's veins. It had been years since he had known gentle touch, tender affection. The arena had taught him violence and pain. This woman offered him healing and hope. "There's more," Livia continued, her voice growing urgent. "The match Corvus has arranged, it's not just about killing you. It's a celebration, a gathering of Rome's elite to watch my father's greatest enemy finally destroyed. But what if instead of your death, they witnessed his downfall?" Marcus frowned. "What do you mean?" "The evidence of my father's crimes, I know where he keeps it. Documents, correspondence, records of bribes and murders. If those documents were to be revealed at the right moment in front of the right people," understanding dawned in Marcus's eyes. "You're talking about using the arena as a stage for justice." "Why not?" Livia asked. "The crowd loves drama, loves to see the mighty fall. Imagine their reaction when they learn that the senator who has been robbing them through inflated grain prices and false contracts is finally exposed for what he truly is. It was a dangerous plan, fraught with risk for both of them, but it was also brilliant in its audacity. The very trap Claudius had set could be turned against him. Even if we succeed," Marcus warned, "there will be consequences. Your father has allies, friends in high places. They won't let his downfall go unanswered." "Then we'll face those consequences together," Livia said firmly. "As husband and wife, if you'll have me." The proposal hung in the air between them, like an offering to the gods. Marcus looked at this remarkable woman, this senator's daughter, who was willing to sacrifice everything for justice and love, and felt something he had thought dead in his chest, stirring to life. "Hope. Livia Claudia," he said solemnly, taking her hands in his. "Will you marry me?" "Yes," she breathed, and then she was in his arms, her lips meeting his in a kiss that tasted of freedom and redemption, and the promise of a future neither of them had dared to dream. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. "We'll need help, allies. This plan will require more than just the two of us." "I have someone in mind," Livia said. "My slave Claudia. She's been like a sister to me since childhood. She can be trusted absolutely. And you, my cellmates in the Ludus. 3 men who have become closer to me than brothers. If I explain the situation, then we have the beginning of a conspiracy," Livia said with a smile that was part anticipation, part terror. "When is this special match supposed to take place?" 3 days hence, according to Corvus. Then we have 3 days to prepare, 3 days to gather evidence, make arrangements, and plan your survival in the arena long enough for the truth to be revealed. Marcus pulled her close again, marveling at how perfectly she fit in his arms. How right this felt, despite the impossibility of their situation. "You know this is madness, don't you? We're planning to bring down one of Rome's most powerful senators, escape the city with our lives, and somehow build a future together. The odds against us are astronomical." Livia smiled and gestured to the broken statue of Venus beside them. "This is the goddess's temple, Marcus. Venus rewards those who are brave enough to fight for love. And besides," she added with a mischievous glint in her eyes, "didn't you tell an entire marketplace that I was coming with you? It seems to me you've already committed to this madness. Marcus laughed. Actually laughed for the first time in 3 years. So I did. And I've never been one to break my word. They spent the next hour planning, sharing what they knew, working out the details of their desperate scheme. When it came time to part, both were reluctant to break the spell that had been cast in the moonlit temple. "I'll send word through Claudia," Livia promised. "Be ready. And Marcus, yes, stay alive. I have no intention of becoming a widow before I've even had a chance to be a wife." Marcus watched her disappear into the shadows, then made his own way back toward the Ludus. As he walked through Rome's sleeping streets, he felt like a different man than the one who had set out hours earlier. He had a name again. He had love. He had hope. And in 3 days he would have his chance for justice, or die trying. The gladiator Marcus had been content to survive one fight at a time. But Marcus Aurelius Maximus had something to live for again, something worth fighting for beyond mere survival. The game was about to begin, and this time he intended to win everything. The pre-dawn darkness of the Ludus was broken only by the flickering light of oil lamps. As Marcus made his way back to his cell, his mind raced with the events of the night, the touch of Livia's lips, her desperate plan, the impossible hope that had been kindled in his chest. But as he approached the familiar confines of his prison, the weight of what lay ahead settled on his shoulders like a lead cloak. His 3 cellmates were awake, waiting for him with the patient vigilance of soldiers who had learned to sleep with one eye open. Brutus sat sharpening his gladius, the rhythmic sound a familiar comfort in the uncertain night. Titus was doing slow stretching exercises, keeping his massive frame limber despite the cramped quarters. Flavius lounged on his cot, but his eyes were alert and watchful. "Well?" Brutus asked without looking up from his blade. "Was it a trap?" Marcus closed the cell door behind him and leaned against the cold stone wall. "No. But what I learned makes a trap seem almost preferable." He told them everything about Livia's warning, her father's plan, the conspiracy that had destroyed his family, and the desperate scheme they had hatched in the ruins of Venus's temple. When he finished, silence settled over the cell like a shroud. Finally Titus spoke, his deep voice rumbling with suppressed emotion. "So our Marcus is not just a fallen nobleman, but a man with a bride waiting for him. And here I thought gladiators never got happy endings. This won't be a happy ending if we're not careful." Brutus warned. "What you're describing isn't just dangerous, it's suicide. Taking on a senator like Claudius, trying to expose his crimes in public. Even if you succeed, you'll have made enemies of half the Roman elite. Better to die fighting for justice than to be murdered for someone else's convenience." Marcus replied, "But I won't ask any of you to share that fate. This is my fight." Flavius snorted derisively. "After 3 years of watching your back, you think we'd abandon you now? Besides," he added with a grin, "I've always wanted to see a senator brought low. The entertainment value alone is worth the risk. What would you need from us?" Titus asked practically. "We're gladiators, not politicians. We know how to fight. But this conspiracy of yours requires more subtle skills." Marcus had been thinking about this during his walk back from the temple. "Flavius, I need you to use your contacts in the city. Find out everything you can about this special match, who's going to be there, what the arrangements are, how the arena will be set up, and see if you can get word to Livia's slave Claudia. We'll need a way to coordinate our efforts." "Consider it done," Flavius nodded. "What else?" "Brutus, you served under several commanders during your time in the legions. Do any of them still hold positions of influence? Men who might remember Marcus Maximus favorably?" The scarred Gaul frowned in concentration. "Possibly. General Lucius Fabius Valens always spoke well of you when your name came up in conversation. He's retired now, but he still has connections throughout the army, and there's Tribune Marcus Antonius Cursor. He served as your aide-de-camp during the Germanic campaigns. Last I heard, he was stationed here in Rome. Can you reach them? It would be risky, but yes. They might listen if I can convince them I'm not just a mad gladiator spinning tales." Marcus turned to Titus. "And you, my friend, I need you to help me survive whatever they throw at me in the arena. If this plan is going to work, I have to stay alive long enough for the truth to be revealed." The German's scarred face creased in a predatory smile. "Now that's a task I can handle. Tell me about this Crustus you're supposed to fight. 7 feet tall, stronger than any man has a right to be. He's never lost a match, and most of his opponents don't survive. They call him the Titan of Carthage." "Every giant has weaknesses," Titus said thoughtfully. "Size usually means slower reflexes, and that much muscle requires enormous amounts of energy to maintain. If you can make the fight last long enough, his strength will become a liability." "Assuming I survive the first few minutes," Marcus pointed out grimly. "You will," Titus said with absolute certainty, "because you have something to fight for now beyond mere survival. Love changes a man, makes him capable of things he never thought possible." As they continued planning, none of them noticed the small figure that crept past their cell in the corridor outside. Gaius Trebius Maxima had been unable to sleep since his conversation with Marcus the previous evening. The revelation that his star gladiator was actually the disgraced nobleman Marcus Maximus had shaken him to his core. For 3 years, he had profited from the skills of a man whose true identity would have made him worth a fortune in ransom money. But now that same identity put everyone in the ludus at risk. If Senator Claudius discovered that Trebius had been harboring his enemy, the lanista made his way to his office, where a single lamp burned low on his desk. Beside it lay a scroll that had been delivered shortly after Marcus left for his mysterious meeting. Trebius had read it 3 times already, but the contents still made his hands shake. It was from Corvus, and it contained an offer that was both generous and terrifying. 50,000 sestertii for arranging Marcus's death in the arena, plus a guarantee of protection from any political fallout. But it also contained an implicit threat. Failure to cooperate would result in the ludus being shut down and its owner facing charges of harboring a traitor. Trebius stared at the scroll for a long moment, then reached for his stylus and a fresh piece of parchment. He had spent his entire adult life walking the fine line between profit and survival in Rome's dangerous political landscape. This time would be no different. He began to write, "To the Honorable Senator Gaius Claudius, greetings." Meanwhile, across the city, another clandestine meeting was taking place in the luxurious villa of Senator Claudius. The man himself sat in his private study, surrounded by the spoils of a lifetime of corruption. Greek statues, stolen from conquered cities, Egyptian gold liberated from temple treasuries, Persian carpets that had once graced the palaces of kings. Across from him sat Sextus Corvus, his thin face animated with the excitement of a man who saw opportunity in every crisis. "The arrangements are proceeding smoothly," Corvus reported. "Crustus has been briefed on what's expected of him. The match will be to the death, no quarter given or asked. The barbarian understands that his own freedom depends on ensuring Maximus doesn't leave the arena alive." "Good," Claudius nodded. "And the witnesses? You've confirmed that all the right people will be in attendance?" "Indeed. Senator Marcus Crassus Aquilus will be there along with his key supporters in the Grain Merchants Guild. General Publius Valerius Maximus, no relation to our troublesome gladiator, will represent the military contingent, and I've arranged for several influential plebeian leaders to attend as well. When word spreads of how a treacherous gladiator met his end, it will reinforce the lesson about what happens to those who challenge Rome's natural order." Claudius smiled with satisfaction. The guest list had been carefully chosen to maximize the political impact of Marcus's death. Each witness would carry the story back to their own circles, spreading the message that enemies of the established order would find no mercy, no matter how far they fell. "What about security?" Claudius asked. "I want no disruptions, no chance for any of Maximus's former supporters to interfere." "Already handled. The arena will be surrounded by your personal guards, plus a contingent of Praetorians that I've arranged through my contacts in the imperial household. No one gets in or out without authorization." "Excellent. And afterward?" Corvus's smile turned predatory. "Afterward, Senator, You'll be the man who finally ended the threat of Marcus Maximus. Your rivals will think twice before challenging you, and your allies will be reminded of the benefits of your friendship. It's a perfect solution to a persistent problem. But even as they spoke, the first cracks were beginning to appear in their carefully laid plans. In a modest apartment in the Suburra, Claudia was meeting with a network of slaves and freedmen who formed an invisible web of communication throughout Rome. Messages were being passed, favors called in, old debts collected, and in a villa on the Aventine Hill, General Lucius Fabius Valens read a message that had been delivered by a former gladiator claiming to speak for Marcus Maximus. The old soldier's weathered hands trembled as he read words that challenged everything he thought he knew about the downfall of one of Rome's most promising young commanders. The pieces were being set in motion for a confrontation that would shake the foundations of Roman society. In 3 days, the arena would witness more than just a gladiatorial match. It would see the collision of truth and lies, justice and corruption, love and hatred. Marcus spent the remaining hours before dawn writing a letter that he prayed would never need to be delivered. If their plan failed, if he died in the arena before the truth could be revealed, he wanted Livia to know how much their brief time together had meant to him. "My beloved Livia," he wrote by the flickering light of the oil lamp, "if you are reading this, then I have failed to keep my promise to build a life with you. Know that in the short time since we met, you have given me something I thought was lost forever. Hope. You saw in me not the broken gladiator I had become, but the man I once was and might be again. For that gift alone I would have faced 1,000 Crustuses in the arena." Marcus frowned. "Titus, you're not scheduled to fight. How could you possibly?" "I've arranged a substitution," the big German replied calmly. "One of Crustus's usual warm-up opponents has developed a sudden illness. Food poisoning, very unfortunate. I'll be taking his place in the preliminary match. That's incredibly dangerous. If Claudius realizes we're working together, then he'll have 2 gladiators to worry about instead of 1. Titus interrupted. "Marcus, you've been fighting alone for 3 years. For once, let your friends help you." Before Marcus could argue further, a commotion at the Ludus entrance drew their attention. Aurelius Maximus was approaching with a group of strangers, well-dressed men, with the bearing of officials. Marcus recognized one of them immediately, Lucius Domitius Cursor, the imperial inspector, who oversaw gladiatorial schools. "Maximus," Trebius called out, his voice tight with nervous tension. "These gentlemen wish to speak with you." Cursor was a thin, officious man, with the pale complexion of someone who spent most of his time indoors with scrolls and ledgers. But his eyes were sharp and calculating as they studied Marcus. "So you're the famous gladiator everyone's talking about," Cursor said without preamble. 43 victories, no defeats, most impressive for a man of your background." The way he said background suggested he knew more than he was letting on. Marcus kept his expression neutral. "I've been fortunate in my opponents." "Have you indeed? Tell me, Maximus, do you have any objections to tomorrow's special exhibition? Some gladiators find private matches unsettling." It was a trap, Marcus realized. Cursor was probing, trying to determine if he knew about the conspiracy against him. "I fight where and when my lanista commands," he replied carefully. "The identity of my opponent matters little." "Spoken like a true professional," Cursor said with a thin smile, "though I understand your opponent tomorrow will be formidable. Lucius Domitius Crustus has quite a reputation, as do I." "Yes, you do. The question is whether that reputation is entirely accurate." The veiled threat hung in the air between them. Marcus felt his cellmates tensing behind him, ready to fight despite the hopelessness of their situation. "Gentlemen," Trebius interjected hastily, "perhaps we could continue this conversation in my office. The gladiators need to return to their training." "Of course," Cursor agreed, though his eyes never left Marcus's face. "Until tomorrow, gladiator. I'm sure it will be a match for the ages." As the officials departed, Marcus felt the weight of inevitability settling on his shoulders. The net was closing around him, and tomorrow would bring either vindication or death. That evening, As the sun set over the 7 hills of Rome, another clandestine meeting took place in the ruins of Venus's temple. Livia arrived first, her dark cloak barely concealing the leather satchel she carried. Inside were copies of documents that could bring down not just her father, but half the Senate if their contents became public knowledge. Marcus appeared from the shadows like a ghost, moving with the predatory grace that 3 years in the arena had taught him. In the fading light he looked more like the god of war than a mere gladiator, and Livia felt her heart race at the sight of him. "You came," she said, echoing their first meeting. "I gave my word," he replied, then crossed the ruined temple in 3 quick strides to take her in his arms. Their kiss was desperate, hungry, flavored with the knowledge that this might be their last time together. "Did you bring the evidence?" Marcus asked when they finally broke apart. Livia nodded and opened the satchel. "Everything is here. Records of bribes, correspondence with assassins, proof of the fabricated evidence used against your family. There's enough here to destroy not just my father, but 3 other senators and a dozen wealthy merchants." Marcus examined the documents by the light of a small oil lamp Livia had brought. Even in the flickering illumination, he could see that the evidence was damning beyond question. Letters detailing payments for murders, receipts for falsified testimony, records of stolen property, and inflated contracts. It was a complete catalogue of corruption spanning decades. "This is incredible," he breathed. "But how do we ensure it reaches the right people? Tomorrow's match will be attended by Claudius's allies and supporters. They'll have no incentive to see justice done. That's why I've made additional copies," Livia said. "Claudia is already distributing them to key figures throughout the city. Honest senators, tribunes of the plebs, military commanders who have reason to remember you favorably. By tomorrow morning, enough people will know the truth that my father won't be able to suppress it." "And what about you?" Marcus asked, cupping her face in his hands. "Once this becomes public, you'll be in as much danger as I am. Claudius won't hesitate to kill his own daughter to protect his secrets." "I know," Livia said simply, "which is why I won't be in Rome when the revelation happens. I'm leaving tonight, immediately after this meeting. Claudia has arranged passage on a merchant ship bound for Alexandria. I'll wait there until it's safe to return." Marcus felt his heart constrict. "Alone, Livia, the dangers of such a journey are less than the dangers of remaining here," she finished. "Marcus, my beloved, we both know that tomorrow could end badly for both of us. But if you survive, if justice prevails, I want you to know where to find me." She pressed a small scroll into his hands. "These are the details of where I'll be staying in Alexandria. When it's safe, when the political situation has stabilized, come to me. We'll have the wedding we've dreamed of, and we'll build the life we've planned. And if I don't survive—" Livia's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. "Then I'll mourn you as your widow, and I'll spend the rest of my life ensuring that your name is remembered with honor instead of shame." They made love then in the ruined temple, among the broken statues of the goddess of love, with a desperate passion born of the knowledge that it might be their last time together. Afterward, as they lay entwined on Marcus's cloak, Livia traced the scars on his chest with gentle fingers. "Promise me something," she whispered. "Anything. Promise me you'll fight to live, not just to win. Promise me you'll come back to me." Marcus captured her hand and pressed it to his heart. "I promise, my love, I'll find a way to survive, and I'll come to you in Alexandria. We'll have our wedding, our life together, everything we've dreamed of. Do you swear it?" "By Venus herself, by all the gods. I swear it by my love for you," Marcus replied solemnly. "Nothing will keep me from your side. Not Crassus, not your father, not death itself." They parted as the moon reached its zenith, each going their separate ways with heavy hearts, but renewed determination. Livia to her ship and safety, Marcus to the ludus, and whatever fate awaited him in the arena. As he made his way through Rome's darkened streets for what might be the last time, Marcus carried with him the memory of Livia's touch, the weight of her trust, and the knowledge that tomorrow would determine not just his own fate, but the fate of justice itself. One day remained. In the morning he would step into the arena as a gladiator, but if fortune favored him, he would emerge as Marcus Aurelius Maximus, redeemed, vindicated, and free to claim the woman who had chosen to risk everything for love. The greatest battle of his life was about to begin. Dawn broke over Rome like a blade cutting through silk, painting the marble columns of Senator Claudius's private amphitheater in shades of gold and crimson. The irony was not lost on Marcus as he stood in the gladiator's preparation chamber beneath the arena floor. Today he would either die in the same colors that had once adorned his family's banner, or he would emerge reborn in the light of justice. The chamber was spartanly furnished with wooden benches, weapon racks, and a small altar to Mars, where gladiators could make their final prayers. Marcus knelt before the shrine, but his words were not addressed to the god of war. Instead, he spoke silently to Venus, asking the goddess of love to protect Livia on her journey to Alexandria, and to grant him the strength to keep his promise to return to her. Talking to the gods, Titus asked as he entered the chamber, already dressed in his gladiatorial gear. The big German's presence was a comfort, though Marcus knew his friend's participation in the preliminary match put him in almost as much danger. "Talking to my future," Marcus replied, rising from his knees. "How do you feel about today's work?" "Like a man about to watch his best friend attempt the impossible," Titus answered honestly, "but also like a man who's finally going to see justice done. That's worth any risk." Flavius appeared in the doorway, his face grim with news. "It's time. They're calling for the preliminary fighters, and Marcus, there's something you should know. Brutus couldn't make it." Marcus felt his blood chill. What happened? He was arrested last night. Someone informed the Praetorians that he was spreading seditious rumors about Senator Claudius. He's in the Mamertine prison, awaiting interrogation. The betrayal hit Marcus like a physical blow. Someone had discovered their plan, or at least part of it. If Brutus had been taken, what did that mean for the rest of their conspiracy? Was he alone when they took him? Marcus asked, fearing the answer. "No," Flavius replied quietly. "General Valens and Tribune Cursor were arrested as well. The official charge is conspiracy against the state." Marcus sank onto one of the wooden benches, the weight of failure crushing down on him. Without his military allies in the crowd, without witnesses who could vouch for his character and innocence, the evidence Livia had gathered would be meaningless. Claudius had moved faster than they had anticipated. "It gets worse," Flavius continued reluctantly. "Word is that Claudius knows about the documents. His people intercepted some of the copies Claudia was distributing. They're calling it a fabrication, claiming the whole thing is an elaborate plot by foreign enemies to destabilize Rome." "Then we've failed before we've even begun," Marcus said, his voice hollow with despair. "Without credible witnesses, without the element of surprise, this becomes nothing more than my word against a senator's. And who's going to believe a gladiator over one of Rome's most powerful men?" Titus placed a massive hand on his friend's shoulder. "Maybe no one will believe a gladiator, but they might believe Marcus Aurelius Maximus, especially if he proves his identity in a way that can't be denied." Marcus looked up sharply. "What do you suggest?" "I'm suggesting you stop fighting like a gladiator and start fighting like the commander you once were. Show them not just skill with a blade, but tactical genius, leadership, the qualities that made you famous throughout the legions. Make them remember who you really are." Before Marcus could respond, the sound of horns echoed through the chamber, signaling the beginning of the games. Above them they could hear the crowd gathering, the excited chatter of Rome's elite settling into their seats for what they expected to be a spectacular entertainment. "It's time," Flavius said, embracing both his friends. "Whatever happens up there, know that you've been the best companions a man could ask for. It's been an honor to serve with you both." Titus was called first for the preliminary match against a Thracian fighter named Cassius. As he prepared to leave, the big German turned back to Marcus with a fierce grin. "Remember what I taught you about giants," he said. Every one of them has feet of clay. Find Crustus's weakness and exploit it without mercy. Titus, Marcus called as his friend reached the door. If I don't make it out of there, you will, Titus interrupted firmly. Because you have something to live for now. That makes all the difference. Alone in the preparation chamber, Marcus began the ritual of armament that had become as familiar as breathing over the past 3 years. Leather sandals laced tight around his calves, bronze greaves to protect his shins, a manica of leather and metal plates to guard his sword arm, the belt that held his subligaculum in place, the simple loincloth that was a gladiator's only concession to modesty. But when he reached for his helmet, Marcus paused. Instead of the standard gladiator's helm that would hide his features, he selected a different piece, one he had purchased with his own meager earnings and kept hidden for 3 years. It was a commander's helmet, plain but unmistakably military in design, the kind worn by legion officers in the field. Today he would not fight as the gladiator Maximus. He would fight as Marcus Aurelius Maximus, and he would make sure everyone knew it. Above, in the luxurious seating area reserved for honored guests, Senator Claudius surveyed his domain with satisfaction. The arena was filling with exactly the sort of people he wanted as witnesses: wealthy merchants who depended on his favor, junior senators who owed their positions to his influence, and military officers whose loyalty he had purchased with gold and political advancement. "Quite a turnout," observed Sextus Corvus, settling into the seat beside his patron. "Though I notice some expected faces are absent. Valens and his cronies won't be troubling us," Claudius replied with a cold smile. "I've seen to that. As for the documents that my traitorous daughter helped distribute, they're already being dismissed as clever forgeries. By tomorrow, this entire affair will be remembered as nothing more than a desperate attempt by Rome's enemies to sow discord through lies and deception. And your daughter, she been located?" Claudius's expression darkened. "Livia has proven to be more resourceful than I gave her credit for. But no matter, she can run to the ends of the earth, but she'll never escape the consequences of her betrayal. When this is over, I'll make sure she's brought back to face justice for her crimes." In the arena below, Titus faced his opponent with the calm confidence of a man who had survived 8 years of mortal combat. Cassius was younger, faster, but lacked the German's experience and tactical awareness. The crowd cheered appreciatively as the two fighters circled each other, seeking advantage. But Marcus barely watched the preliminary match. His attention was focused on the crowd, searching for any sign that their plan might still have a chance of success. Most of the faces he saw belonged to Claudius's supporters or neutral parties who had come for entertainment. But then he spotted something that gave him hope. In the upper tiers, where less distinguished citizens sat, he saw clusters of men wearing the white togas of common citizens, but with bearing that suggested military experience. Veterans, perhaps, drawn by rumors that Marcus Maximus might still be alive, and scattered throughout the crowd were other faces he recognized. Former soldiers who had served under his command, plebeians who remembered his efforts to reform the grain distribution, even a few younger senators who had once looked up to him as a mentor. The evidence might have been discredited, his key witnesses arrested, but there were still people in the crowd who remembered the truth. If he could somehow prove his identity, demonstrate that he was indeed the Marcus Maximus they had once respected. The preliminary match ended with Titus standing victorious over his fallen opponent, though the German was bleeding from several wounds. As he was escorted from the arena, he caught Marcus's eye and nodded once, a gesture of encouragement and farewell. Then it was time. Gladiator Maximus called the guard captain. "You're summoned to the arena." Marcus rose, checking his weapons one final time. Gladius at his side, dagger in his belt, shield strapped to his left arm. He had chosen the classic equipment of a Roman legionnaire rather than the exotic weapons favored by many gladiators. Today, he would fight as his ancestors had fought, with Roman steel and Roman courage. The tunnel leading to the arena floor stretched before him like the throat of some great beast. As he walked toward the light at its end, Marcus thought of Livia, somewhere on the Mediterranean bound for Alexandria. He had promised her he would survive, would find a way to come to her. Now it was time to keep that promise. The roar of the crowd hit him like a physical force as he emerged into the arena. 1,500 of Rome's most powerful citizens rose to their feet, some cheering, some jeering, all eager to see the spectacle that had been promised them. The afternoon sun blazed down from a cloudless sky, turning the sand beneath his feet into a carpet of gold. Across the arena, another tunnel mouth disgorged his opponent. Lucius Domitius Crustus was even more imposing than Marcus had imagined. 7 feet of sculpted muscle and bone, moving with surprising grace for a man of his size. His skin bore the ritual scars of his Numidian homeland, and his eyes held the flat, emotionless stare of a born killer. But as Marcus studied his opponent, he remembered Titus's words about giants having feet of clay. Crustus was indeed massive, but that size came at a cost. The giant's breathing was already slightly labored from the walk to the arena center, and there was a slight favoring of his left leg that suggested an old injury. The arena official, resplendent in his purple striped toga, raised his hand for silence. "Citizens of Rome," he called out, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet, "today you witness a match of champions. From the sands of Numidia, undefeated in 5 years of combat, the Titan of Carthage, Lucius Domitius Crustus." The crowd roared its appreciation. Crustus raised his massive sword in acknowledgement, his movements theatrical and practiced. And his opponent, the official continued, the gladiator known as Maximus, victor of 43 consecutive matches. More cheers, though Marcus noted they were less enthusiastic. He was popular enough as a fighter, but Crustus was the crowd favorite. Marcus stepped forward and in that moment made the decision that would change everything. Instead of raising his sword in the traditional gladiatorial salute, he removed his helmet entirely, letting the crowd see his face clearly for the first time in 3 years. A ripple of recognition ran through the stands. Voices began to whisper, then speak, then shout as more and more people realized what they were seeing. "By Jupiter's beard," someone called out, "it's really him, Marcus Maximus, the general who saved us at the Rhine." "But he was supposed to be dead, traitor," shouted another voice, one of Claudius's supporters. "Condemned criminal." The crowd was becoming agitated, divided between those who remembered Marcus favorably and those who believed the official version of his disgrace. Senator Claudius rose from his seat, his face purple with rage at this unexpected development. "Silence," he roared, his voice carrying the authority of decades in the Senate. "You see before you a condemned traitor, a man who betrayed Rome for foreign gold. Whatever name he once bore, he is nothing now but a slave, a criminal entertainment for your amusement." But Marcus had found his voice at last, not the broken whisper of a defeated gladiator, but the clear, commanding tone that had once rallied legions to victory. "Citizens of Rome," he called out, his words carrying to every corner of the amphitheater. "I am indeed Marcus Aurelius Maximus, but I am no traitor. I stand before you innocent of the crimes that destroyed my family, the victim of a conspiracy orchestrated by the very man who sits in judgment over me." He pointed directly at Senator Claudius, his finger steady as a blade. "There sits the real traitor to Rome, a man who has grown fat on stolen wealth while honest citizens starved, who has murdered his rivals and blamed his crimes on innocent men." The crowd erupted in chaos. Some shouted their support, others their condemnation. Fights were breaking out in the stands as old loyalties and new suspicions clashed. But through it all, Marcus stood calm at the center of the storm, knowing that he had finally spoken the truth that had been locked in his heart for 3 years. Claudius was on his feet now, gesturing frantically to his guards. "Seize him. He speaks treason. He defies the judgment of the Roman people." But the guards hesitated, unsure of their authority in this unprecedented situation. This was supposed to be a simple gladiatorial match, not a trial of a senator's integrity. "Let him fight," someone shouted from the crowd. "Let the gods decide who speaks truth." The cry was taken up by others, until it became a chant that filled the arena. "Let them fight! Let them fight!" Crustus, who had been waiting patiently through this dramatic exchange, stepped forward with his massive sword ready. "Enough talk," he rumbled in accented Latin. "We are here to fight, not debate. If you are truly Marcus Maximus, prove it with your blade." Marcus turned to face his opponent, slipping his helmet back on, but leaving his face visible. "Very well, Titan, but know that you face not just a gladiator today, but a Roman who fights for his honor, his name, and his love." The official, clearly out of his depth, but unwilling to abort the match with the crowd so inflamed, raised his hand one final time. "Let the contest begin. May the gods smile upon the righteous." As the signal was given and the two warriors began to circle each other, Marcus felt a strange calm descend over him. Win or lose, Marcus barely noticed any of it. His attention was focused entirely on scanning the crowd for a familiar face, searching for the woman who had haunted his dreams for 3 months. "There," Flavius said quietly, pointing toward a section of the dock where the crowds were thinner. By the statue of Poseidon. Marcus's heart stopped. Livia stood in the shadow of the great bronze statue, her dark hair catching the afternoon sunlight like a crown of silk. She wore a simple white chiton in the Greek style, a concession to Alexandria's heat, but to Marcus she looked more beautiful than Venus herself. Her hands were clasped before her, and even at this distance he could see the tension in her posture, the way she searched the ship's passengers with anxious eyes. For a moment, neither of them moved. 3 months of separation, of uncertainty, of fears and hopes and dreams, all crystallized into this single instant of recognition. Then Livia's face lit up with a smile that could have outshone the lighthouse of Pharos, and she began to run. Marcus leaped from the ship before it was fully moored, landing hard on the dock and nearly stumbling in his haste. But then she was in his arms, and nothing else mattered. Not the curious stares of the dock workers, not the shouts of the ship's crew, not the entire world beyond the circle of her embrace. "You came," she whispered against his chest, her voice breaking with emotion. "I knew you would, but I was so afraid." "I promised," Marcus replied, his own voice thick with unshed tears. "I told you I would find you, and I keep my promises." They held each other for a long moment, neither willing to break the spell of reunion. When they finally pulled apart enough to look at each other, both were crying tears of joy, of relief, of love too powerful for words. "Let me look at you," Livia said, her hands framing his face. "You're thinner, and these new scars." Her fingers traced the marks left by his final battle, wounds that had healed but would always remain as reminders of what he had endured. "I'm alive," Marcus said simply. "That's all that matters. I'm alive, I'm free, and I'm here with you." "Yes," she breathed, and then their lips met in a kiss that tasted of salt spray and tears, and the promise of forever. When they finally broke apart, Flavius cleared his throat diplomatically. "Perhaps we could continue this reunion somewhere more private." "The entire dock is staring." Livia laughed, the most beautiful sound Marcus had heard in 3 months. "Of course, I have a house in the Greek quarter, away from the Roman merchants who might recognize us. We'll be safe there." As they made their way through Alexandria's winding streets, Livia told him about her months in exile. She had used her knowledge of Greek and her intelligence to establish herself as a tutor for wealthy Egyptian families, teaching their daughters literature and philosophy. It was humble work compared to her former life as a senator's daughter, but she spoke of it with genuine satisfaction. "I discovered something here," she said as they walked hand in hand through a marketplace filled with exotic goods. "I discovered who I am when I'm not defined by my father's name or his expectations. For the first time in my life, I was just Livia, not a political asset or a marriage prize, but simply myself." "And who is that?" Marcus asked, enchanted by the confidence and peace he saw in her. "Someone who can be happy with very little, as long as she has love," Livia replied, squeezing his hand. Someone who discovered that freedom matters more than comfort, that truth matters more than safety. The house she had rented was modest, but beautiful, built around a central courtyard in the traditional Egyptian style. Flowering vines climbed the walls, and a small fountain provided the soothing sound of running water. It was nothing like the opulent villa she had grown up in, but Marcus could see why she loved it. "It's not much," Livia said, suddenly seeming nervous again. "Nothing like what you're accustomed to. It's perfect," Marcus interrupted, pulling her close again. "Livia, I don't care if we live in a palace or a mud hut. All I want is a life with you." That evening, as the sun set over the great city and painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, they sat together in the courtyard garden and talked about everything: their fears during the separation, their dreams for the future, the love that had sustained them through the darkest months of their lives. "I have something for you," Livia said as the first stars appeared overhead. She disappeared into the house and returned with a small wooden box. "I've been working on this while I waited for you." Inside the box was a simple gold ring, beautifully crafted, but without precious stones or elaborate decoration. But it was what was engraved on the band that made Marcus's breath catch: the ancient seal of the Maximus family, perfectly reproduced from memory. "I wanted you to have this when we wed," she said softly. "A new ring to replace the one you sacrificed to prove your identity. A symbol that the Maximus name will continue, will be honored again." Marcus slipped the ring onto his finger, marveling at the perfect fit. "How did you—" "I remembered every detail from that night in the temple," Livia replied. "I've thought about you every day, every hour since then. I could have carved that seal from memory on my deathbed." "Marry me," Marcus said suddenly, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "Not someday, not when everything is perfect. Marry me now. Tonight. I don't want to spend another day without calling you my wife." Livia's eyes filled with tears again. "Marcus, there's no priest here, no proper ceremony." "Then we'll make our own ceremony," he replied fiercely. "Under these stars, in this garden, with only the gods as witnesses, we'll speak our vows to each other and make them as binding as any words spoken in the greatest temple in Rome." Flavius, who had been tactfully making himself scarce, suddenly appeared in the doorway. "Actually," he said with a grin, "I may be able to help with that." He gestured, and to Marcus and Livia's amazement, a procession entered the courtyard. Titus, somehow freed from the gladiator schools and grinning widely; Claudia, Livia's faithful slave, who had apparently made the journey to Alexandria; and an elderly Egyptian priest, wearing the robes of Isis, goddess of love and marriage. "How?" Marcus began. "You think you're the only one with connections," Titus rumbled, embracing his old friend. When word reached Rome that Marcus Maximus was sailing to Alexandria to marry his beloved, certain people decided the occasion deserved proper witnesses. "General Valens sends his regards," Claudia added with a smile, "along with his blessing for the marriage and a substantial wedding gift. It seems restoring your family's property made you quite wealthy again, my lord." The priest stepped forward, his ancient face kind and wise. "I am Maset, servant of Isis. Lady Livia has told me your story, and the goddess herself has blessed this union. Are you prepared to speak your vows under the stars of Egypt, as your ancestors might have done in the early days when love was stronger than law?" Marcus looked at Livia, seeing his own joy and wonder reflected in her dark eyes. This was not the wedding either of them had imagined. No great temple, no hundreds of guests, no elaborate ceremonies, but it was perfect in its simplicity, blessed by friendship and love rather than political necessity. "I am," he said firmly. "As am I," Livia whispered. They stood together in the center of the courtyard, while their friends formed a circle around them. The priest began with ancient words in Egyptian, calling upon Isis to bless their union, then switched to Latin for the vows themselves. "Marcus Aurelius Maximus," he intoned, "do you take this woman as your wife to love and cherish, to protect and honor, in prosperity and adversity, in sickness and health, for as long as the gods grant you life?" "I do," Marcus replied, his voice strong and clear. "I take Livia Claudia as my wife, my partner, my beloved. I promise to love her with all my heart, to be faithful to her alone, to stand by her side whatever trials may come. I pledge her my name, my protection, my devotion, and all the love I have to give." "Livia Claudia," the priest continued, "do you take this man as your husband, to love and cherish, to honor and support in prosperity and adversity, in sickness and health, for as long as the gods grant you life?" "I do," Livia said, tears streaming down her face. "I take Marcus Aurelius Maximus as my husband, my love, my heart's desire. I promise to stand by him through whatever the future brings, to love him faithfully, to be his partner in all things. I give him my heart, my trust, my devotion, and all the love I possess." The priest smiled and raised his hands toward the star-filled sky. "By the power of Isis, goddess of love and marriage, by the witness of your friends, and by the vows you have spoken, I pronounce you husband and wife. May your love be as eternal as the stars above, as enduring as the pyramids, as deep as the Nile itself." As their friends cheered and congratulated them, Marcus and Livia kissed again, this time as husband and wife, bound together not just by love, but by sacred vows that would unite them for life. Later, after Titus and Flavius had departed to find lodging in the city and Claudia had retired to her own quarters, Marcus and Livia sat alone in their courtyard, hands intertwined, wedding rings catching the moonlight. "No regrets?" Marcus asked softly. "You've given up everything, your family, your country, your former life, for a disgraced gladiator who has nothing to offer but love." Livia turned to face him fully, her eyes shining with absolute certainty. "I've given up nothing that mattered and gained everything I ever wanted. Marcus, 3 months ago, I was a senator's daughter, with no say in my own future, destined for a loveless marriage to a man who saw me as property. Today I'm the wife of the man I love, free to choose my own path, my own destiny." She lifted their joined hands and kissed his knuckles gently. "You say you have nothing to offer but love. Don't you understand? Love is everything. Love is the only thing that matters. All the gold in Rome, all the power in the empire means nothing compared to what we have together." Marcus felt his eyes fill with tears again, tears of gratitude, of wonder, of overwhelming love for this extraordinary woman who had saved him in every way a person could be saved. "I love you, Livia Maxima," he whispered, using her new name for the first time. "And I love you, my husband," she replied, "forever and always, no matter what comes." As they sat together under the Egyptian stars, holding each other close and planning their future, neither of them could have imagined how their love story had begun, with mockery in a Roman marketplace and an impossible declaration. But it had led them here, to this perfect moment, to this perfect love that had overcome every obstacle and would endure beyond death itself. In the distance, the lighthouse of Alexandria sent its beam across the dark waters of the Mediterranean, guiding ships safely to harbor. And in a small garden in the Greek quarter of the great city, 2 souls who had found each other against all odds, settled into the quiet contentment of true love, realized the gladiator's arena was empty now. The senator's daughter had made her choice. And love, pure, honest, eternal love, had conquered all.